Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
I'm going to find a way to get our budget balanced. We have to protect our schools, our public safety, our public universities, our environment.
What's next after budget talks in Sacramento break down when Governor Brown and Republicans reach a final impasse? San Francisco considers offering social media company Twitter a controversial tax incentive to relocate to the city's mid-market area. Many are without medical coverage on this one-year anniversary of the Affordable Care Act.
We will not accept any contract until those growers who are growing injunctions and damage suits against the ILWU drop their demands.
And with Cesar Chavez Day celebrations, how far have California's farm workers come? That's all coming up next. Good evening, and I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight on our news panel are David Bacon, Associate Editor, New America Media; Victoria Colliver, Healthcare Reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle; Rachel Gordon, City Hall Reporter, also with the Chronicle; and Carla Marinucci, Senior Political Writer with the San Francisco Chronicle. So, Carla, you heard it. The governor said, I'm going to find a way to get a budget. What is he going to do?
I mean, you heard his YouTube message, which came out on Monday. This situation is just ugly, ugly, ugly. No other way around it. We were here just last week in this very chair. It looked like the Republicans and Brown were talking and things were going to get done. On Monday, he came out with that YouTube message, suspended all the talks with the Republicans and said, I just don't know what they want anymore. They don't seem to know what they want anymore. In fact, the Republicans have put out a list of what they wanted, 53 items, 7 pages, including things like county fair management, and it went on and on from there. Brown has called it all off. He now says he's going to do a state tour and actually talk to voters himself. He's put out a pension plan of his own and says he's going to get it out there and pass this legislation with or without Republican support. But the bottom line is the budget. What happens now? What is Plan B? Is it no election, which is possible? Maybe they'll try and do this all up in Sacramento without going to the voters. Is it a September election, a November election? Right now, it is a mess. There's just no other way to characterize it.
Speaking of elections, the California Federation of Teachers released poll results today done by Tulchin Research that said that 79% of all California voters and 3 out of 5 Republicans would vote yes on an initiative that raised the taxes 1% on the top 1% of the income earners in the state of California, which would only actually take their tax rate back to the mid-90s.
You know, it's interesting you raise that point, David, because the Republicans have continually thrown up Andrew Cuomo in New York saying there's a Democratic governor who has delivered a budget without taxes and done it early. How did he do it? Well, New York has exactly what you're saying, a surcharge for those who make over $250,000, which has helped close the budget, which has huge support from the taxpayers of New York. That's only one of the ways Cuomo has been able to do it, and Brown hasn't. The 2/3 majority needed to pass new taxes in California is something they don't have in New York. And it's a huge difference here.
Carla, the hurdle, it seems, is not to get the taxes passed at this point. It's just to get them on the ballot. What do the Republicans say when they're asked, why don't you just let the people decide? If the people don't want the taxes, then we won't have the taxes. How do they answer that?
Yeah, I mean, even a lot of moderate and conservative Republicans have said, look, what's the loss? Just put it in front of the people. The fact is that the Republicans say the voters weighed in on this in 2009. they were very strongly against new taxes, and it's the job of the legislators to rule. The big problem is they don't want labor to weigh in. There'll be a lot of money thrown at this from both sides. Both sides are worried about that.
It sounds like they're saying they know better than the voters, though.
They're really in a bind in taking this position. A lot of even Republicans up there say, what is the loss? Just go for it. If the voters vote it down, they're covered.
Maybe the Republicans can read poll numbers too, though. I mean, maybe they're afraid that even Republicans at this point are going to vote for tax increases.
The latest PPIC poll, David, showed it isn't going to be a lock for Jerry Brown to get this stuff passed, even if it goes before the voters. And of course, you're talking about a huge war with all kinds of ads. We do know from that last vote in 2009, people don't like to have to weigh in on this stuff. They'd rather it be settled up there in Sacramento, which is why there's talk now of maybe they're just going to do it that way. Maybe they're going to try to get some Republicans on board and pass this stuff up in Sacramento, not go to the voters. However, Jerry Brown is in a bind. He has said from the beginning of his campaign, I will not pass new taxes unless the voters approve them, and that is his problem. He's got to
is it a Jerry Brown problem or a Republican problem?
This is both of their problems up there, Victoria. I mean, a lot of people fault Brown for making that kind of campaign promise, for not being able to deliver. The Democrats made a lot of risks up there, voting against redevelopment and some other things. They put themselves on the line. The Republicans sat out a lot of those votes on cutting social services. So the Democrats aren't happy with Brown either in some ways, but this is a very heavy lift for Jerry Brown.
Is there a way,
worked it hard.
Out of those 52 items on the list, to discern what is really important to Republicans? I mean, at some point, won't they have to, pick out a few things that are possible?
Absolutely. I mean, we do know they want a spending cap, they want pension reform, they want regulatory reform, which includes rolling back environmental regulations as well. This is some stuff that, of course, Democrats don't want to give in on, but Brown himself has said, pension reform being an example, look, we know we've got to do something here. He's come out with this 12-point plan, and at this point, he looks ahead of the game. He's now saying, I'm going to go to the people on this. He's got messages out to the public. And the Republicans really have no game plan. So
we're saying that he's going to go to the public. Why can't Republicans do the same thing?
They are. I mean, they are. But the fact is, Jerry Brown is a guy who has done this for 40 years and knows how to get a message out. As you've seen with the YouTube, he's done this a couple of times now. And if he goes out there and campaigns around the state, as he says he's going to do starting next week, his message goes to the voters a lot more than the Republican leadership up there doesn't seem to have a consistent message.
Do you think we'll get to the point like we saw in the Midwest, though, where people are going to take over the Capitol and there's a showdown that way? I mean, is it going to get that bad because we don't have a budget? Social services are being cut. Schools have bigger classroom sizes. People don't want to pay taxes.
Both sides have something to worry about if that happens. Look, the public opinion on public employees unions, that has changed a lot on this pension issue. People are angry about that. Spending issues, people are angry about that. On the other hand, how far do they want to cut? Do they really want to see school year cut 3 weeks? Fire stations closed. That's something Brown is banking on that Californians will not accept.
So we're sort of going into election mode. And we should be expecting messages.
Welcome to the perpetual campaign in California.
Well, one of the interests of the Republican Party is to look out for business interests. In San Francisco, there are people here looking out for business interests. There's a proposal to give one of the big giant tech companies a break here to keep jobs.
This is the Democrat-only San Francisco Board of Supervisors, a Democratic mayor, and they're looking to a corporation, Twitter, as he said, the social media company, saying, we really don't want you to pack up and move down to the peninsula, which they're threatening to do. What can we do to keep you in San Francisco? Right now, that company has about 350 employees. It's planning to go to 2,500, 3,000 employees over the next several years. So San Francisco officials, led by Mayor Ed Lee, Board of Supervisors President David Chu, and a newcomer supervisor, Jane Kim, who represents the mid-market area, said, look, here's the deal. We've got to revitalize this area. Mid-market's on Market Street between about 10th and 5th Street. It's kind of the Skid Row of San Francisco now. if you move here, if you're a company that moves here and you grow jobs, we're going to put a cap on payroll taxes for any of the new employees that are hired. It's kind of win-win. The companies can get some kind of a tax break. The city might get some new life into these neighborhoods. They've since expanded it to go to the Tenderloin a little bit, which is just north of there. A lot of vice going on there. Other companies said, great, that's a good deal, but what if I don't want to move to the mid-market area? What else might you have for me? And so this whole thing started to come out about tax options. About stock options for companies. That's really the big bugaboo in this whole thing. Companies like Twitter, like Zynga, like Yelp, that are potentially going to go public soon, that's where they could get a big hit on paying payroll taxes. San Francisco is the only city in California that levies a payroll tax, 1.5%, on stock options. So if you buy a stock option for you're an employee, you get one for $10, you sell it for $1,000, you're going to get taxed on that higher rate right now. For a company like Twitter, that's potentially tens of millions of dollars. So while there's a mid-market plan that's being contemplated, a number of other supervisors are coming in and saying, maybe we have to reform the whole business tax and give a break completely citywide on the stock options.
It doesn't, at this point, when you've got a company like Twitter, internationally known, doesn't that company have San Francisco over a barrel in this case? You don't want to lose a company like that.
Right, they absolutely do. And people are looking at Twitter is, the new technology boom in San Francisco. That's where they're looking to have the jobs. We, of course, have the bread and butter of the hospitality industry, but they're going biotech, green technology, high technology software companies. That's where we're going to start getting the money in San Francisco. And so they're fearful that if you do go down to the peninsula, which we've seen, right, that other companies will follow. What can you do to keep them?
Are there any examples out there? I'm sorry, David. Any examples of other cities who have done this in California?
No, because San Francisco has a unique payroll tax. There are some other jurisdictions that have a payroll tax for businesses, but most have a combination of it. People are going, why would you tax job creation here? There are a lot of opponents, though, and that's led by former Supervisor Chris Daly, John Avalos on the Board of Supervisors, Service Employees Union 1021, which is the largest city employees union. They're going, is this really the time, though? They're calling it corporate welfare. When we're looking at asking city employees to give up some of their pension benefits, when we've got deep budget problems in San Francisco, a $380 million deficit that has to be closed soon. Services are going to be cut. Employees are going to be laid off. Why would we chance giving this up at all? So it's a kind of a chicken and egg.
Isn't the flip side question, though, with that again?
But also, Rachel, historically speaking, leaving aside the unique nature of the payroll tax here, or the stock option tax, San Francisco, like most municipalities, has a long history of giving breaks of one kind or another for financial services corporations, for healthcare corporations to locate in San Francisco or to stay in San Francisco. Companies take the tax breaks and then eventually they leave anyway. So what guarantee is there that if Twitter got the tax break, that they would stay more than a year or two or three? San Francisco is going to be stuck with sacrificing the money, and it's a lot of money. But who's to say that we're going to really get the jobs?
Or you could go the other way. You could say right now they're not going to get a break on the taxes that they're paying right now, which is about $3.5–4 million for the payroll tax. So San Francisco risks Twitter going down to the peninsula and losing that out altogether. Now, there is a finite time limit on this, that they can collect this tax break for no more than 6 years in the period. The question is, though, has this ever worked before? We've seen that there's been a biotax credit for companies going to the Mission Bay area. That's worked. We started trying that in San Francisco with the film industry to give them some kind of a tax break, because we're losing a lot of business to Vancouver and other cities that have the film industry. It really is, people aren't quite sure what to do with it, but this is, economics, it's land use, it's politics, it's policy. There are a lot of personalities involved with this as well. It's got everyone scrambling, though, because a company like Twitter really is this kind of trophy company to have in San Francisco. A lot of people know about it. 350 jobs, 3,000 jobs, is that going to make or break the economy? Probably not in the city, but people are very fearful of a domino effect either way. Either you're opening the door, Pandora's box, as some of the opponents are saying, to letting all these companies kind of get away with not paying their fair share of taxes. On the other hand, you're going, you've got to have business if you want to fund city employees unions, if you want to fund social service programs, you've got to get the money from somewhere.
Well, San Francisco
Tower, Bank of America's not there anymore, right? And they certainly got a lot of tax breaks to build that tower.
While San Francisco tries to figure out what to do about a payroll tax, our President Obama is trying to figure out what to do about his health care bill that's been sort of out there floating. First anniversary coming up. It's time to do some assessment. So, Victoria, where is the Obama health care bill at this point?
Well, on this 1-year anniversary, it would be March 23rd, but then a week later, there's a whole bunch of other aspects that were signed. So we can look at this as the end of March as its 1-year anniversary. The Democrats used it as the opportunity to trot out all the people that have been helped. We're looking at people who have kids who are adults but now qualify for their health insurance. We have a reduction, actually elimination of caps and spending limits, and also the elimination of the pre-existing prohibition on children's health insurance. So we have a number of people, and there's more than that, being helped. But there's also masses of people who are not being helped. And we also have the Republican side doing various, whether it's Tea Party activists or whatnot, trying to either not pass parts of state legislation that would make the health reform possible. This would be the exchange bill, for example, and that's the place where in 2014, when most Americans are required to buy health insurance, that's where you go to get it. It's kind of a virtual marketplace. California was the first state in the country to actually pass that legislation and get that rolling. But there's various different methods, whether it's through the courts or just simply digging in their heels, that can slow down this process. And that has created, in the public's mind, I think, a pretty confused attitude toward this large piece of legislation. I mean, people don't know how it's helping them, and yes.
What are the polls showing right now on this? Because this has been, I'm wondering if the Republicans have really won the public relations war on this. It is now referred to as Obamacare.
I think that not knowing what to call the thing, ACA.
But do people really understand, since much of the legislation doesn't kick in, as you mentioned, for a couple of years yet? Do people still, are they confused about what?
I think they are. The Kaiser Family Foundation released an anniversary poll that had about, I think it was like 46% of the population that were polled were opposed to it. And we had 42% in favor of it, and like 12% completely confused, not really what to say. And those numbers have been about the same. They've gone up and down depending on what's happening politically. So there is a great confusion about it because it's this big complex thing that a lot of things have to go into motion, and you've had things like health insurers jacking up rates lately, which is a really bad PR for everything, even if it's unrelated.
That's what I was going to ask. Do people know why they're opposed to it? Is it because individuals saw their health benefits cut somehow, or that they had expectations that they'd be getting something that they didn't get in this past year? Or are they still fearful of death panels? I mean, is it reality, or is it just kind of stuff that's out there that they think might be wrong with it? Are there really things to be opposed to at this point?
I think what people are opposed to is they've looked at it and say, how is this really helping me? And if you're the mass majority of people, you get your coverage through your employer, and that really hasn't changed. So they look at these dollars that are eventually going to be poured into the system, and that hasn't really helped them yet. And meanwhile, they may be paying higher rates for their insurance. So
we've had a number of clinics that were supposed to be the answer and part of the solution to this problem closing, key clinics that were providing definitely critical care to many people. How does that fit into this whole pattern?
The clinics are interesting because when we talk about the whole part of the bill then would be, or the law that rather, would be to shift a lot of people into public programs. Where are they going to get their care? Well, a lot of them are going to go to the clinics. So the reason this isn't starting tomorrow is because it's going to take time to ramp up. You have to increase the primary care population. You have to have these clinics there which serve as a safety net. Meanwhile, you look at a lot of them rely on different sources of funding that have since dried up. There's been some influx of money to clinics through either the stimulus fund and eventually, and already started through the health law. But for a lot of them, it's not enough. There clinics, some of them are free clinics, some of them qualify. It's very confusing, but many of them are struggling.
Well, are they going to be able to survive, Victoria? Some of these are clinics like Asian Health Services or clinics that serve a particular population that isn't going to be able to get health care services if those clinics close. You know, in what you're writing, you say that there's a period of 2 to 3 years that they have to survive before the money from the federal medical insurance program kicks in. Are they going to be able to survive?
I think most of them, especially if they've been around for a while, feel pretty confident. But we'll have to see.
Well, some famous ones are on that list.
Haight-Ashbury,
Martin Lyon. But up in Sacramento, they're doing something that we only used to see on foreign soil. There's going to be something called a remote health care day.
Remote area medical, which is they got their name. I think they started in the mid '80s. I want to say overseas, but since in recent years, more and more they've been doing these huge events in this country where they're going to be in Cal Expo in Sacramento this weekend, and next weekend they're going to be in the Oakland Coliseum, and they just bring in all these volunteers. People show up, they line up the night before, they try to see about 1,000 people a day, as many as they can, as many volunteers as they can. So they're they're looking for.
I mean, the Air Force does this now with their personnel. They go to foreign countries and have these massive 3-day health fairs for people.
That's exactly, and they always turn away people. They can only do as many as they can, and many often thousands are turned away.
Yeah, and so in the East Bay next week, there will be, and it's free to whoever gets on that line.
They don't ask any
wait.
questions.
No question, and it's dental, and it's everything.
And it's vision, and it's medical, and they're doing the best they can to treat as many people as possible.
Well, some good news on a story that had a confused assessment. Nothing confusing about what Cesar Chavez wanted for farm workers in this country. We're celebrating Chavez Day. And so, David Bacon, what's the state of farm workers today?
Well, the union did make a really big difference in the lives of farm workers in many ways, Belva. We don't have the short-handled hoe in California fields. Most workers have bathrooms and water. You can imagine what it might have been like to work in a field in which there were no bathrooms and water, which is what life was like before the union came. The union helped workers to get political power. And so if you go out to the San Joaquin Valley or the Coachella Valley, you find lots of small towns where there are Latino mayors and Latino city councils. And that's a product of the upsurge that the union was part of as well, too. And at its height, farm workers made good money, or at least better money than they do today. Farm workers made twice the minimum wage, which would be the equivalent of farm workers making $16 an hour now, which is certainly not what they get anymore. But that being said, Belva, in a lot of ways, the conditions of farm workers have deteriorated pretty substantially. The minimum wage is the wage for most farm workers today. There's very little enforcement of health and safety law. We've had 10 heat deaths in the last few years. In fact, the Superior Court just gave a labor contractor 48 hours of community service to punish him for the fact that a 17-year-old girl working out in the fields died essentially because of her heat exposure. Housing, especially for people who travel with the crops. Growers tore down labor camps a long time ago. There is no housing to replace it, and so when the grape harvest is on in the Central Valley, you find people sleeping in their cars or under trees or even in the fields. So that's a big problem for workers. And then unemployment. You know, we think that 9% unemployment is pretty bad here in the urban areas, or 10% or 11%. Well, unemployment is always pretty much double what it is in urban areas in rural ones. Imperial Valley, the unemployment rate right now is over 30%.
David, are a lot of the farm workers or farms unionized at this point, or is it a small number and then a lot of the other farms, to keep the unions out, decided we're going to try to match what they're offering their workers?
Well, I would say what you're describing was the case in the 1980s. Unfortunately today, the number of farms that are union is quite small, and I think that growers don't feel a lot of obligation to equal the conditions because, you know, union contracts still pay substantially more than minimum wage, and yet for the vast majority of farm workers today, the minimum wage is still the wage that farm workers get.
But David, where are the biggest efforts now to unionize workers? We're hearing that recently in the news, some new efforts to unionize them. Where's that happening? And considering the political situation in the rest of the country, this sort of anti-union wave that we're seeing in Wisconsin and other places, is that going to affect what's happening here in California?
Well, California likes to be different. And there is a bill that is in Sacramento right now, Senate Bill 104, that's what's called a card check bill, that will give workers an alternate way of getting their union recognized and sitting down and bargaining with employers other than elections. There are a lot of problems that unions have with elections, and among them is that they take a lot of time, they provide a forum in which there's oftentimes threats made and so forth. So this would allow workers to sign union cards, and if a majority of the workers sign the cards, then the grower is obligated to bargain, and there are also some penalties for firing people because of their union activity. That's passed through the Senate. It's going to the Assembly. The Democrats are a majority in the Assembly. It might pass the Assembly. Jerry Brown signed the Agricultural Labor Relations Act in 1975. Would he sign this bill? Well, I think there are a lot of hopes he would.
But at a time when unions are really on the hot seat across the country, I mean, planning a massive demonstration coming up just next week, just to show that they have some power.
That's right.
Why would Jerry Brown want to sign this bill?
Well, I think because, first of all, of concern over the situation of workers who are basically at the bottom of our economy. Farm workers, again, have the lowest wages, the worst working conditions, the most dangerous jobs of pretty much anybody in the California economy. So I think that there might be a moral appeal that might be made to him about signing it. But also, I think realistically speaking, when the union was strong, when the farm worker union was strong in California, it changed the politics of the state. And that's something I think that Jerry Brown would be very interested in doing, is to kind of maintain a progressive majority, especially in those areas where the Republicans are strong, rural California.
Well, my thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight. We appreciate it. Well, our program is available to you anytime at kqed.org/thisweek for past episodes and segments, to subscribe to our newsletter and our podcast, and to share your thoughts. We close with photos taken by David Bacon. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.